Bismillah ar-Rahim. So I'm going to talk about contagion and prevention, theology and conflicting values. So my presentation will cover 4 key points: introduction, and then classical Muslim scholars on contagion, and then I will move to talk about 3 models that I selected, and I will explain later why did I choose these names and models, and then finally I will conclude with some remarks. Before I start, I would like to highlight 3 prophetic reports related to the topic, related to plague literature in the hadith collections. The first hadith or prophetic report is, as you see on the PowerPoint, there is no infection or there is no contagion, la ʿadwa, and no evil omen, etc. Then, but flee from one who has tubercular leprosy, as you would from a lion. So the Arabic word, the Arabic version is on the PowerPoint. لا عدوى ولا طيرة ولا هامة ولا صفر, not صفر ولا صفر, وفر من المجذوم كما تفر من الأسد. So this is one of the key hadiths that related to the topic that we're going to talk about. And the second one is narrated by Aisha. She said that I asked the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, about plague, and he said, it is a punishment which Allah sends upon whomsoever He wills, but Allah has made it as a mercy to believers. Anyone who remains in a plagued town, maintaining patience, expecting the reward from Allah, and knowing that nothing will befall him other than what Allah has foreordained for him, he would receive a reward of shaheed. The third one is narrated by Usama bin Zayd, and where the Prophet said, if you get wind of the outbreak of plague in a land, do not enter it, and if it breaks out in a land in which you are, do not leave it. So these are three prophetic reports or 3 hadiths that will be in the background. I'm not going to comment on them, but when I will have some references to them without mentioning them. So just to have a background of these key scriptural texts that are that they played an important role in the theological and classical discussions among Muslim scholars over centuries, especially during the plague. So now let's start with the key remarks in the introduction by focusing on key points here that contagion was a key. The Islamic tradition is rich on plague, depicting a diversity of approaches and perspectives, but with a focus on contagion. So contagion was one of the key issues that was discussed in detail in the very rich Islamic literature on plague. And contagion also is a multidisciplinary topic, as we are seeing when we are discussing vaccination and pandemics in general. So plague is one of the pandemics, the classical pandemics in the classical era. So contagion is a multidisciplinary topic that engages medicine, jurisprudence, theology, and ethics. So it is a case in point that demonstrates the tensions between scripture or tradition or text and the lived experience. and between medicine and Sharia at the same time, especially in the classical times. And also between theology and jurisprudence, as we will see. So addressing contagion from a theological perspective revolves around the pillar of belief in predestination, al-qadar, al-iman bil-qadar, and brings to the forefront the complexities in the relationship between theology, kalam, and jurisprudence, as I said, fiqh. So this discussion highlights the conflict. I mean, our discussions on plague or on contagion in general highlights the conflict between two principles. Number one is the trust in and surrender to God, al-Tawakul ala Allah wa taslim lahu. And the second principle is exercising prudence and caution through undertaking material measures based on natural laws, which has juristic and theological references. So this tension between these two principles is in the background of all the classical discussions and controversial discussions, actually, in this regard. Now let's move to save time. Let's move to the second point, key point. So here I'm going to summarize to you the key classical Muslim scholars' opinions on contagion. If you check the classical literature, you might get lost because of a lot of details and arguments and counter arguments about contagion. And with the different theological backgrounds and arguments, whether they are scriptural arguments or with scriptural references or rational or experienced observations. So, but I will summarize these based on my understanding of the classical literature. I will summarize these opinions by putting them into two main groups. The first group, it refers to or it contains those who completely reject contagion by upholding the apparent meaning of the hadith that denies contagion, that there's no contagion, one of the hadith that I started with, and considering this hadith as a principle according to which other hadiths are interpreted. There are many examples related to this. I'm not going to give more, a lot of details, but it's enough, I think, just to mention the first group. Traditionally, this position is the position of hadith scholars in general and the Ash'arite scholars, some Ash'arite scholars. And the second group is those who that uphold contagion in principle, but depict nuances given the various theological positions on causation and agency. Here we can differentiate between three different positions. The first position, that which believe that causation works independently from divine will. The technical term for this position is usually الطبائعيون, the naturalists, those who believe in the natural laws, and that the natural laws they work inherently and independently. The second position here is that which upholds a role for causation, but not independently from divine will, we can express this in Arabic by saying that الأثر يوجد بالسبب لا عنده. So the causes are the causes have effect, but this effect is not independently or inherently is not inherited in the causes themselves, and it's not systematically it doesn't systematically work. The third group, or the third position here, that which upholds a habitual or temporal association between cause and effect, but rejects causation itself. This is the Ash'arite, the traditional Ash'arite position, where they talk about الاقتران العادي بين السبب والمسبب, the habitual association between the cause and effect. So the cause itself has no impact or effect inherently, and it doesn't work systematically because of some reasons. So these are the key opinions within the Islamic tradition about causation, or about contagion and causation. So the diversity of this, the diversity of this diversity in opinions may be attributed to two key points, in my opinion. The first one, the belief that divine will is a manifestation of God's unity and Him being the sole creator. So then upholding a kind of causation does not align with this belief. So it will harm in a way or another the belief in unity, in divine unity or God's unity. In the perception of the classical Muslim scholar, or at least many of the classical Muslim scholars. The second reason that is in the background of this diversity in opinions is the observation. So we cannot reduce the classical discussions about contagion as they were transgressing the observation, because the observation in the classical time was various, and there was a diversity in observations. So there were some cases that they prove contagion, and there were other cases that they prove that there is no contagion at the same time. So observation and lived experience demonstrate that causation is neither steady, not inevitable, where the effect may lag behind the cause, as in the case of plague. Now let's move to the third section of my presentation, which where I will focus on 4 names or 4 examples that they represent what I call 3 models here. So these names are Ahmed ibn Khatima. He is an Andalusian physician and scholar, Muslim scholar, and Lisanuddin ibn al-Khatib. He was a friend of Ibn Khatima. They were close friends, and they worked together or close to each other in Granada at that time, in the 8th Hijri century. He was Andalusian and physician and scholar, and he was also what we can call now the prime minister. So he was part of the government at that time. He has a power. He was in power, and he was killed later because of political reasons. So the third name is Ibn Lub. Ibn Lub, he is an Andalusian Maliki jurist, and he was an authoritative reference in his times. Ibn Lub is one of the teachers of Imam Shatibi, the very famous scholar, who wrote on Maqasid Sharia. So Ibn Lub, he was his teacher, one of his teachers. So and the fourth one is Ibn Ajiba. Ibn Ajiba, he's a late scholar, and he is a well-known Moroccan Sufi scholar because of his tafsir, his commentary, Sufi commentary on the Quran, and because of his commentaries on Al-Hikam Al-Ata'iyya, one of the very famous Sufi wisdoms. So as you can see, the first three names are contemporary to each other. So, and they were from the same region in Andalusia and specifically in Granada. And the fourth one is a bit late. He was in the 13th Hijri century, 18th or 19th century. So why did I choose these names? So the selection aims to demonstrate the complexity and diversity in the discussions on contagion in the classical time or in the Islamic tradition in general. These this discussion cannot be or this complexity cannot be reduced to the binary positions of reason versus scripture, or reason versus tradition, or literalist interpretation versus purposeful rationalization. So it because it's more complex than these simplistic binaries, in my opinion. And the second reason why did I choose these names is to demonstrate the ethical component of these arguments. The ethical component was one of the key elements in these discussions and different positions, as I will demonstrate later. So and the complex analysis to prioritize different and at times conflicting values. So Ibn Khatima, for example, Ibn Khatima and Ibn al-Khatib sought to prove contagion as causation. Ibn Lub sought to reject contagion as causation, but rather prove temporal or habitual association. Ibn Ajiba sought to completely reject causation. So we are among three different positions from three different backgrounds. So now let's go for the details of these models, what I called models. So the first model is represented by Ibn Khatima and Ibn al-Khatib, Lisan Din al-Khatib. So Ibn al-Khatib openly and directly criticized some jurists, Muslim jurists, over the rejection of contagion, accusing them of conceding on the value of human life. He said that استرخصوا النفوس, and both Ibn Khatima and Ibn al-Khatib uphold contagion as a form of causation, with their proof building on three key elements in my analysis. The first one, that they uphold intrinsic characteristics for causes. The second one is that as physicians, they sought to understand the mechanisms of causation through scientific methods, and to translate that understanding into preventive measures or methods such as isolation and precautions for interaction with the sick people. And the third one is that they employed an empirical component in understanding the disease mechanism and testing preventive methods. What Ibn Khatima expressed in different positions in his manuscript by saying that التجربة والاعتبار بطول المدة. So he was a good observer, and he was experiencing himself indirectly the cases that were plagued at that time in Granada, and he was analyzing these cases that to come to a conclusion based on experience and direct observation. So these are the three main reasons, in my opinion, that the proofs that they use to demonstrate that there is causation, and that there is causation. So these physicians adopted a position of dependent causation, which serves as a middle ground between independent causation and temporal association. So now let's move to the second model. The second model is represented by Ibn Lub, the Maliki scholar that I already mentioned before. Ibn Lub attempted to formulate a perspective that addresses several concerns and warned against Satan's scheming at times of adversity, such as giving up the care and support for the sick, which leads to foregoing the reward in the afterlife and destroys the social fabric. And he was also concerned with the ethical and social dimensions, and was influenced by the theological position of the Ash'arites. He was Ash'ari himself, which left its mark on his response to questions on avoiding others during the times of plague. He underscored, for example, the importance of social relations during the plague, and he highlighted the importance of treating others as one would want to be treated, through imaging oneself in the position of the plagued, and how alienation could have one to suffer thirst or and hunger, or be denied burial rituals. And when he was asked about the various opinions on contagion, he did allow for transmission of disease, provided one believes it is under God's will, and provided that this belief in transmission does not translate into foregoing social duties and the rights of the sick. Now the third model is represented by Ibn Ajiba. Ibn Ajiba, I already mentioned him before. He mocked local authorities in Tetouan, in Morocco, for locking city gates to prevent contagion. He believed that life and death are totally under divine will, with no place for causation. And he also encouraged his companions to expose themselves to destiny, divine destiny, and so as to strengthen their belief. His utmost concern was to preserve people's faith and deter any attachment to worldly causes. We have to take in consideration this time in the 18th and 19th century, the prevalent direction among those rejecting quarantine at that time. So there is a parallel positions with this position. So now to conclude, my presentation highlights several issues. One of these issues that contagion is a problematic concept with various connotations, including two main concepts. The first one is that the observable transmission from one person to another, although it was not termed as contagion, but at some points it was called contagion from others, but by some scholars they don't call this contagion. So so it's a matter of the term and the concept, how it was conceived. What do you mean by contagion exactly? So, and we have to be cautious dealing with this definition in the classical or conceptions in the classical literature. The second meaning is that which is the main conception of contagion, that is that the independent causation inherent in causes such as plague being independently contagious. So this is the conception that was termed as contagion by by those who were called الطبائعيون. So those who denied contagion, they were referring to this conception mainly. Now, one of the key points that I wanted to highlight also the discussions over contagion largely stemmed from religious and ethical concerns, but prioritization of values was influenced by by three elements, key elements. The first element is that the areas of expertise and perspectives of the scholars, especially since plague was a mysterious disease at that time, for which the medicine of their times was not able to provide a coherent understanding or propose treatment methods, consequently promoting scholars to resort to scriptural, mainly hadith or prophetic reports for explanations. And the second element is that the potential for interpretation when it comes to hadith text or texts, and the conflicts between different hadiths, with which opened the door for various interpretations. So this is why this is one of the key elements that why we have these differences and diversity in opinions. And the third element is the observed experience, as I mentioned before. So at times pointing towards proving contagion, and at times pointing otherwise. So it did not provide a firm conclusion on the consistency of contagion. Neither was medicine convincing enough to generalize its conclusions. So and also one of the last point that I wanted to highlight in this presentation, the conflicting values. So the conflicting values reflect perspectives. At the time, it was very difficult to harmonize between these values in terms of different elements. I'm not going to go in details about this. So, but we can summarize these values, the key values, or three models that they revolve around three key values. The first position was revolving around prioritizing preserving life. So this was the position of the physicians, Lisan al-Din al-Khatib and Ben Khatima. The second position was prioritizing preserving the social fabric as the key value here, or the central value that it should be preserved. This is the position of Ibn Lub, as I mentioned before. And the third position is the position of prioritizing preserving faith and belief. This is the position represented by Ibn Ajiba, as we saw. And I will end up here and leave the rest time for discussion and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martaz. Maybe if you could leave the conclusion up on the screen. Oh, it's okay. No, it's fine.
Okay.
We have we have half an hour, almost half an hour for discussion before we finish up. There is a question on Q&A from Farah Sadek. The question is, how does Ibn Ajiba's perspective relate to the Islamic principle of Tawakul? It seems to be conflicting.
So his perception of, as a Sufi scholar, his perception of Tawakul was أن تسلم نفسك للأقدار, you know, so أن تستسلم للقدر, so without preventing and taking any material measures. So this was his conception of Tawakul at that time. So, and this is the perception of some other Sufi scholars actually. So it was made more complicated in terms of plague, mainly because of its nature and because of the rich literature, hadith literature that are related to this topic. So it was considered not as a normal disease, but it was considered as something related to the divine will, as a punishment because of some interpretations, some prophetic reports. So these elements, you know, supported the position of being istislam lil qadar, you know, without preventing this disease. I hope that I answered your question.
Thank you very much. There are no further questions so far. If people want to write their questions, or if there are any members of the panel who wish to intervene and ask a question or make a comment orally, you're welcome to do so. In the meantime, if I could ask you, I know you've done so much work on this, to relate what you have analyzed and researched from the classical scholars. What can you bring from that literature to the current debates with regard to the COVID pandemic? Can you draw some direct conclusions? Yeah.
In the current discussions about the pandemic, coronavirus or COVID-19, I think I don't see that the classical theological discussions are present as it was in the classical times. So the objections on vaccination now is not referring to prophetic reports or any theological position. So it seems that we moved from this area to another area by which is more materialistic and related to scientific facts. So whether they are this will affect them negatively, or it will be benefit to preserve them, or that the lack of information about these vaccines, or the lack of trust even, and maybe some other people are part of the growing direction now, which is called anti-vaccination. So I know that I have some friends from these in Italy and other countries who are against vaccine in principle, not because of theological reasons or interpretation, but because of more political and economic interpretation or reasons.
Could you elaborate on that?
So, for example, now one of my friends in Italy, now I was in discussion with him. He is threatened to lose his job because he rejected the vaccine because he's a teacher at the school, and he thinks that there is mu'amara, he doesn't trust all the information about the coronavirus in general and the vaccine in specific. So, and he is against also about the vaccine in principle, not the vaccine against coronavirus. So he didn't get the vaccine for his children also, and they are now out of the school. So because the law in Italy that if your children are not vaccinated, they will not be allowed to enter the school. So, and he took the risk, and I know that in that area he is not alone. There are many Italian people in that area, so they are together supporting this and arguing against vaccination in general. So because they think that it's not serious, and it's a matter of capitalism and political reasons. So they want to gain more money and to control all people and to be typologized, yeah. So it's mainly political and economic reasons, but not. I didn't see any theological background in these discussions. But in the Arab world, the case is different. There is marginal position, theological position. So that we witness for example in Iraq, within the some Shi'i groups, they were against isolation and the quarantine because of theological positions and beliefs, because they think that how come you don't allow people to go to the mosques to preserve their lives, while going to the mosques and praying are the means to get preservation from God. So, and these places are أماكن طاهرة. I don't know how to say this. Sacred places that they help you to be safe. So how come now it became to be dangerous if you gather together, if you gather with others in these places? So within the Shi'i discussion, there was these arguments. There were some arguments. I already wrote an article on this on Al Jazeera website, discussing these ideas from a theological background.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Ghali,
hello, Ray, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Mu'taz, for bringing up these points and explaining these complex issues. Just to simplify things, I will start with the comments, small comments, and then the question to share with you. So just let me know what you think about the comment, if this is expressing what you want to say, or there is inaccuracy in your response about the question. In the earlier pandemics, from what I understand from your lecture, your writings, in the early pandemics, there was a big debate about the scope of the role of two actors or two agents, if we may say, God and nature. God on one hand and nature on the other hand. As I understand from what you said is that Muslim religious scholars and even Muslim physicians were moving forth and back how to combine this. So some people said that the only actor is God. So the whole causation issue is coming from God. So there is no contagion. It's God who decides everything. And those who, because of the pressure of the reality coming from the pandemics and the people who die, especially mass deaths, they said it's clear, it's nature. And those who try to combine that God does something and nature does something and how, etc. It seems that these discussions, of course, these discussions are the very first point if we want to speak about any protective measures from pandemics. So if we speak about vaccination, if we speak about quarantine, if we speak isolation of infected people, if we say that there is no contagion, these diseases are not infectious, etc., it's God who decides, so they are pointless. We don't have to do any of these things. But if we say there is contagion, these diseases can get from one person to another, etc., then we have to think what are the protective measures that we can take. It seems to me that these theological nuances and complexities started to be less and less central, at least in the public discourse, because we know much more about nature now and about its laws, because there is modern advanced science. So the gaps that the anti-contagion discourse used and employed to cast doubts about the phenomenon of contagion are now more or less filled. Even before we could have a vaccination, develop a vaccination, till now we don't have medicine, but we knew how it happens. We give a name for the virus, characteristics, publications, etc. So it became very difficult. So I think the theological discussions now are much more about that this precision about how nature works can be used to prove the unity of God. That all these precise natural laws are not necessarily at the cost of belief in God, because it's God who made these nature and these natural laws, especially because it's not working haphazardly. I don't know if you think this is more or less what we can get from your talk, or if I misinterpreted anything. My question to you, you spoke about models, different models to this in the classical literature. Can we speak about models in the modern time? Can we say that certain models disappeared now in this theological interpretation about contagion? Can we speak about new models? Can we speak about a model, for instance, that some religious scholars think it is irrelevant to discuss these issues, these theological issues? We have to be more juristic in nature, fiqhi, practical, what to do, what not to do, and not to involve people in these theological complexities. How do you see these models in the modern discourse? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghali. Do you know that any fatwa against vaccination now? Is there any fatwa against vaccination? Before I answer your question.
Yes, there are some fatwas, but I'll speak about this tomorrow. They are quite few in number, but there are, and not only now, by the way. For the polio,
so
we had,
but
not as to the best of my knowledge, not because of theological, but because of juristic positions. That, for instance, the material, having prohibited material in the vaccination, especially the Chinese vaccine, there was a discussion. For the polio vaccination, some, especially in Nigeria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, they said that it has some elements to sterilize Muslim women, causing infertility.
So there is no fatwa against vaccination, but there is fatwa against specific vaccination.
Yes,
because of its component. Okay. So I think this point is very important. So it's not about against vaccination in principle or in general for theological reason, but about the component of the vaccine, such vaccine. So the same, if you remember that there was a discussion and controversial issue about closing the mosques at the very beginning of coronavirus. So we had some fatwas against closing the mosques. And they underestimate the harm behind or the risk behind keeping the mosque open, for prayers and for gathering. So some of these fatwas against closing the mosques used different arguments, whether from the history or from the prophetic reports or some theological arguments to prove that you cannot close the mosque because prayer is one of the sha'air al-Islam, one of the rituals of Islam, the key, the major rituals of Islam, and you cannot do this, and the risk is not serious. But I didn't see any theological direct theological discussions related to what I discussed about contagion in in specific. So yeah, I wrote a detailed study or long study on the idea to argue for that we moved from practical theology to, with coronavirus, we moved from practical theology that it was the main argument and the main discussion in the classical time on plague, to what we call now applied ethics with coronavirus. So now there is no question about contagion, if there's contagion or not, but the question is about the details and the practical issues from a religious point of view. I mean, apart from what I mentioned before about political and economic reasons, especially in the West. I don't know people following the same in this region. So following in the same direction, I mean. So actually, we moved. Classical theological discussions are not existing anymore, or they are not effective anymore in terms of when we come to pandemics. But applied questions or what I call applied ethics is the central issue here. So is it useful? Is it effective? What are the components of this vaccine, etc.? So we have a different set of questions, which they are practical questions, not theological anymore. So this is what I call, we moved from practical theology, which was dominant in the classical discussions, to applied ethics. And this study is published in Tabayun journal, which is published by Doha Institute, by the Arab Center in Doha. The second, I agree with what you said before about this controversial or this discussion between the God and nature, but still, I wrote some articles on Al-Jazeera.net. How can we reopen the theological discussions in terms of when it comes to coronavirus? So how can we develop the theological theology in this regard? But so there's still some questions related to, we know the mechanism. Now we understand the mechanism of these pandemics, or and how we know a lot of details about coronavirus, for example, now. And although that we don't have or before we have a vaccine, there was a trust that we will have a vaccine. So it was a matter of time, and now, although that it's still spreading anywhere, and there are versions of this virus, but still, we trust more the science, and we trust the effectiveness of this science. So because we have specialization, and we know more about these diseases and the epidemiology, and and other things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take another drink, and well, I have two more questions for you. The first is, in Belgium, there is a growing anti-vaccine sentiment among Muslims. Some use the concept of Tawakul as a reason. Personally, I think that there is a mistrust from Muslims towards our government, since Muslims are a discriminated minority. Would you like to comment on that? It's a statement rather than a question.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, it's not a question. Yeah, I think the problem of how to define tawakkul is still a controversial issue to among some Muslims because of their conception or their understanding of the relationship between God and nature, as Dr. Ghali explained before. So I can tell you now, if you are a Sufi, then traditional Sufi, not all Sufis are like this, but if you are traditional Sufi, following Ibn Ajiba and other Sufi scholars who believe that if you are a good and true believer, you should not take causes, ترك الأسباب. So if you are a true believer in God, so then you should not rely on asbab, the causes, and you should introduce yourself to God's will, whatever it is, So this belief is still alive with, in certain groups and conception or understanding of Sufi tradition. There is a poetry on this Sufi poetry saying that لا تدبر لك أمرا فداء تدبير شرك. So you don't try to understand the mechanisms of the causes and don't rely on these causes. So if you attach yourself to these causes, materialistic causes, then you are not a true believer. It depends on your stage. They don't say that for everybody. This is a very good point, a very important point. So they don't say that every Muslim or believer should do this. No, but they categorize it. They categorize people in different stages. So at one stage, you should leave the causes and receive the divine will with pleasure, whatever it is. So there are some people maybe have the same understanding and they should implement this understanding or this interpretation, but it's not systematically and it's not for everybody. This is how the Sufi tradition says.
Okay, thank you very much. I still have two more questions. The opinion of this is from Umar. The opinion of the teacher Ibn Lub differed from that of his student Ibn al-Khatib, but the former defended the latter when he was facing some political turmoils. Will it be right to infer that their differed opinions was more an enrichment than a conflict in the classical Islamic literature? Do you get?
Yeah, this is what I think I try to. Yes, this is what I think I try to explain. I didn't see the conflict. That there is conflict between the position of Ibn Lub and the position of Ibn al-Khatib. So, but I think that there was a different approaches. Which value is more has the priority to preserve the individual human life, or to preserve the social fabric and social duties that people they have to help each other and to keep the religious rituals and to visit the sick people and to help them, giving their food, them food and all their needs. You know, at that time, you know, at the time that plague was not was a mysterious issue and it's not understandable, and there was no effective clear evidences that how to deal with this disease. It's totally different from what we are dealing now with coronavirus. You know, I think if Ibn Lub was in our time, his understanding conception will be different, because now we have tools, modern tools, how to deal with the sick people, with how to prevent the spread of this virus, and you know, but these tools were not there at the time of Ibn Lub, for example. So this is why I said that at the time that you know, having a harmony between these different values was not available or applicable at that. But in our part, there's no this conflict between these values, because we not achieve them all together because of the power of the science and epidemiology and the tools that we have now.
Thank you very much. Last point by our dear friend Naima. I'm not sure if this is a question, or anyway, I'll read it. So, a choice not to get vaccinated for personal reasons and beliefs will also come under prioritizing preserving life. So it's a conflict between preserving life, between those who want to get vaccinated to save life versus not getting vaccinated to preserve life. This is she's made it clear that this is a comment rather than a question, but do you have any response?
I actually I didn't get your comment clearly, because I think, I don't know, there was interruption, maybe from my side or from your side, I don't know. So
well,
I didn't get the point.
Okay, as it's a comment rather than a question, I'll just repeat it again. Maybe it was the way I read it. I'll try again. So a choice not to get vaccinated for personal reasons and beliefs will also come under prioritizing preserving life. So it's a conflict between preserving life, between those who want to get vaccinated to save life versus not getting vaccinated to preserve life. I think that we can ask Naima for
yeah, I think it's about, I think it's about the definition of life here. So how do you define life here, you know? So if you so the life that we are talking about in this context is regarding preserving the human life, you know, as you know, as how can I explain this? It's not the you know, the basic meaning of human life, so that there's no risk on continuing alive.
Right. Well
but
put.
if you compose somebody to take the vaccine, for example, this will not put his life in risk, you know, but not getting the vaccine will put others' life in risk.
Okay, we have reached the end of the first day. Thank you so much, Dr. Mortaz, for your presentation. Thank you, participants, for your attendees, for your questions, and thank you for your comments and responses. It was very, very informative. It was a really nice day. Thank you very, very much. We will begin the second day tomorrow at 1 p.m. Doha time, and Dr. Muhammad Ghali will be moderating tomorrow. So 1 p.m. Tomorrow for the second day of the summer school. Thank you very much, and have a very pleasant evening.